Hey, good morning to those of you on the West Coast. Good afternoon to those of you on the East Coast here where I'm at. I'm excited today to get started with the how many RFI, RFP responses should you write? It's always a fun question to get asked. And I love just giving a direct answer that's like, here's what I would do and here's what I'd recommend you do. And you can kind of filter that down. Before we get started, I want to just give a quick tip for those of you showing up early and on time. I really appreciate it. Thank you for doing that. It makes it the training go excellent. So the tip for today, though, is I put out a LinkedIn post this morning, and this LinkedIn post is from the Council on CDOs, Chief Data Officers. And so if you're in the data space or really anywhere in the IT space, this is in particular important to you. But also, if you're not, like let's say you're in construction doing elevators or whatever, there's other similar documents to what I'm about to talk about that could be helpful. So let me give you this tip before we get started with today's training. In this document that I shared, it's the government's playbook from the executive office down to all the agencies saying, hey, we've told you have to appoint chief data officers. Here's what we recommend a chief data officer does to succeed. And it's like 20, 25 pages or something. But if I was a small business, if I started a small business right now and I was going into the data space, I would take this playbook, turn it into a roadmap, and go right back to my target customers and saying, hey, I'd like to talk to you about this. I'd like to see where you're at on different stages. I wouldn't necessarily reference that CDO document, but my idea is to kind of ghost that document, if you will, by coming in and talking to an agency about how I could solve their problems. And the idea is in their own head, they might go, oh my God, I have to do that anyways. Tell me more, Neil. So I recommend you take a look at these strategic documents. The one I posted on LinkedIn today is called a playbook for chief data officers. It's fantastic, but I believe you can find similar type of documentation coming out of the government in any space we're in, perhaps except for product sales. All right, let me turn off this caption and we'll get started here in a split second. And thanks for everybody saying hello in the chat. Hello back. Okay, let's get started. In this session, we're going to talk about how many RFIs and RFP responses you should write. I'll start with why writing responses is important, and then we're going to move on to how many you should write, my recommendation for how many you should write, and then end up with how you can write responses quickly, because that's part of the big challenge there. If you don't know who I am, my name is Neil McDonnell. I'm the president of the GovCon Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to my daily LinkedIn Live sales training, where I provide processes and procedures for you to achieve success in the federal market. While I do post to other social media platforms, LinkedIn is the only social media platform where professionals can come together and network with each other, hence the reason I do my live events here. Please connect with me. If you're not connected with me, connect with me. And if you see me send you a connection request after this because you're here, go ahead and accept it. I'd love to have the connection with you on LinkedIn. I spent 20 years as a small business owner in the federal market. And since 2018, I've helped hundreds of small businesses win billions of dollars in contracts by teaching people like you that government contracting is not a secret. It's just a process. A process is A to Z. When you follow a process, you'll get predictable results. And that's what we all want. Before we get started, do me a favor. Help buyers and people in this community and me remember who you are. Put your company name and your core competency in the chat. I'm seeing a lot of people do it, which is awesome. There's a new one for me. Brian doing LED lighting and fire alarm supplies, for example. That's perfect. Like a couple of words that just describe your core competency. Make it easier for me to remember who you are, for buyers to remember who you are, the people in the community, and then the thousands of people who will watch the replay. People will see this. And all of this is building your branding or visibility to others. So do it every day. By the way, never feel like you could do it too much. You can never tell us too much your company name and your core competency. It just drives it in. So go ahead and put that in the chat. I am going to come back and look at the chat. I do ask that you get engaged in the chat. I'm going to ask you different points to put something in the chat. This is to help me and my team just see, are we reaching you? Is the message making sense? But it's also helping others in the community just see, reinforce the messages we're trying to get across. So please participate in the chat. It also gives you a chance to meet potential teammates. So if you're open to connections, put that in. So if you haven't been here before, I go at a fire hose pace. I'm going to move forward pretty fast. My goal is to give you actionable tips by the end. So let me know when you see them coming across. I wanted to start with, before going into how many responses should we write, I just wanted to talk about why, some of the reasons why people tend to avoid writing RFI responses or even RFP responses. And so I'm just going to rattle off like 5 reasons, right? One is that they think they're too busy. By the way, as I go through, if you think that the one that I'm saying fits with you, then put it into chat. For example, just put too busy if you think that you're too busy to be able to write responses. Maybe you're billable all the time and you can't get to it. You think it takes too long, put too long in the chat if that's you, right? It's so hard to write a response because it takes too many hours, too many days. Number 3, they can't find RFI or RFPs to respond to that are in your space, in your core competency. So if that's you, just put can't find in the chat. Number 4, you think you suck at writing, right? If you think you suck at writing, put suck at writing in the chat. This is something a lot of us struggle with. We think that we have to be perfect writers. You don't have to be. You just have to learn that skill and work with people who will help you develop that skill. There's great writers who are even in this community. And then number 5, you feel like, or they feel like your responses, when they go to the government, they're dead on arrival. So put DOA in the chat if you feel like you're just writing responses and they go to oblivion, right? So DOA in the chat. Also, let me know if I missed one, right? If there's another reason that you might be hesitant or just not getting to writing responses, I'd love to see those. So put those in the chat. Let me know what I missed. Next thing I want to talk about is why writing a response is just vital to your success. It's so important. And not just this one is not just my opinion. You will not win unless you write. You obviously must write proposals, but RFIs are the way you shape the acquisition to go in your direction. So it's vital for your success that you write responses. And let me just give you reasons why. So not in any particular order, but I've got 7 reasons I want to give you on why it's important to write RFI and RFP responses. First one is that it demonstrates to the buyer that you're the subject matter expert. Your company has subject matter expertise in this niche. The second reason is it gets you in the door, helps you avoid cold calling altogether. It actually allows you to talk to a program office, talk to a contracting office, and other people who are looking at the responses. Your written words are basically having a meeting inside the wire, inside the agency for you, right? So you're getting in the door without having to cold call. So if you understand what I'm talking about submitting a response gets you in front of a person who now is reading what your company does and how you can help them. Just put knock, knock in the chat. Let me know that you understand that writing responses help you get in the door by putting knock, knock in the chat. Number 3, it's your marketing. When you write responses, you're marketing to a captive audience of buyers, the acquisition personnel, the people in the program office. When these responses come back, they're not just going into a garbage can, even though we feel this. They're going to people who have a responsibility of reading it. The contracting officer wants the program office to be reading the responses, to giving the acquisition personnel feedback, things like that. And it's not just the program office, right? If we niche down a little more, potentially you're marketing directly to people who are on the selection board. When you write a proposal, it gets reviewed by a handful of people who are basically the selection board. They will select the winner, basically, right? And so when you write responses, you're marketing to that selection board or those buyers as a captive audience. They're sitting there, they're reading. If you write a compelling response, they're going to be compelled to work with you, or they're certainly going to remember you. Number 4, it's part of our 4-hour rule. And so let me explain this 4-hour rule. People only buy from those they know, like, and trust, right? They certainly can't buy from you if they don't know you. So they buy from people they know, like, and trust. And the way you begin to get them to know you, to like you, to trust you is by engaging with them in different ways, passively or actively. So actively might be a meeting, passively might be engaging with them on LinkedIn, or writing a white paper, doing a video, doing a podcast, whatever it is, writing responses to RFIs and RFPs. Those are part of the 7-hour rule. Means at some point you're getting these buyers to have heard about you or engaged with you in one way or another over a period of 7 hours. I'll give you a quick example, right? I want you in my community. I want you coming every day. Every day that you come, I've got you 30 minutes closer to that 7-hour rule. And my hope is that by the end of 7 hours, you know, like, and trust me. right? And I continue to try to earn your trust by bringing you content that I think you would find valuable. You want to do the same thing for the government. So an RFI response, as an example, or even an RFP response, you're providing the government your subject matter expertise on a need that they have. And so you're working your way towards that 7 hours that's required for them to know, like, and trust you. So if you understand and you're following with what I'm saying, that you need to engage for 7 hours before they truly know, like, and trust you, put 7 hours in the chat. Let me know you're following along with what I mean by 7 hours. So put that in the chat. Number 5, you're going to get invited back to this agency the next time. If you don't know this, I described that the #1 market research tool in the federal government is DSBS, the Dynamic Small Business Search Tool. But before they ever go to that, which is looking for sellers outside their agency, they look to who are we contracted with right now? Who have we contracted with in the past? These seem to be reliable businesses that we could work with again. The next group they might look with is who has responded to RFPs and RFIs, right? Who almost won an RFP that we liked and we wish we could bring them forward. If you were writing RFI and RFP responses that are impressing the government, that they kind of wish they could work with you, but they awarded it to somebody else, when they go to reach out to industry again, they might not even start with a broader group of people. They might just look inside and say, let me reach out to these 5 companies for this initial RFI and get their thoughts on Amazon Web Services or data analytic services that we're thinking about putting out for a formal RFI later. And so my point is, when you write responses, you are on their radar. They know who you are, and your likelihood of getting invited back the next time they have a need, a requirement, is much higher than your competition. That was number 5. Number 6 is responding to RFIs and RFPs actually does help your business development and capture efforts, right? Of course, it really is part of your BD and capture efforts, but it supports your future ones as well. From a capture perspective, you could think of it of shaping the requirements, the technical requirements, or the acquisition strategy that the government's going to use, which contract vehicle. Like I'm starting 8A Star Street Accelerator program that I'm doing. We start that on Monday. And what I'm going to be doing is helping these companies shape the acquisition strategy of many opportunities so they start pushing task orders to Stars 3. Well, you should be doing that same thing. And one of the ways you can do that is by writing responses. When you write an RFI response and you say, hey, we think your acquisition strategy should be this, or we'd like you to consider this, the very fact that you wrote it down makes them consider it. Whether they do it or not is secondary, right? But they consider it. Same thing with the technical requirements. If you're a data shop and you want them to consider a certain direction for data technical approach, by writing it in a response, both the RFI or the RFP response, you're getting the government to think about it and see it. You're getting them to see you as the trusted advisor and SME on this. Whether they go that way or not, partly is obviously up to them, but partly it's up to the persuasiveness of your recommendation. So when you write something like that, you want it, and you're recommending, hey, we recommend you go path A, then you want to give them the why. Well, in these RFI responses and your RFP responses is where you time and again are demonstrating how much you can help them, how much you are a trusted advisor to their needs as they go forward. This is also, by the way, why I tell you you must focus on a single agency or a single department at least, so that you're beginning to get known with response after response after response. I've seen these people before. I really like what they say. Oh, I like what they're saying here. These people will remember you. Remember 7 hours, and they will know, like, and trust you if you fit into their space. So that was 6. Number 7, last one on why to write responses, in particular RFI responses, but even RFP, is that you'll beat out your competition. So one of the things you have to keep in mind about RFPs is it's okay to write to something that you just saw in SAM. I know there's this thing that we all say, I've said it too, is that if you see it in SAM, you're too late. But that's not quite true, because if it's your core competency, if you can do it as well as Microsoft, if you're doing SharePoint, for example, which is a Microsoft product, and you can do it as well as Microsoft, I would be writing to that. And the reason is because the incumbent or the person who should win it, or it's wired to, they could make a mistake and you're in. And if you're only writing to your core competency, as you'll see in a minute, it's not a big lift for you to write to your core competency. But RFIs, you can beat your competition out because you're writing in such a compelling way that the government, in particular the program office, looks and goes, oh my God, this is exactly what I want. And so when you write to a response, you can write and push your competition right off the table, or much of your competition, by the way you convince the government they should be looking at CMMI level 3, or they should be looking at this thing or that thing that is unique to you, a differentiator that starts pushing your competition off. So if you understand what I'm talking about, writing responses can lead to you beating your competition. Just put win in the chat. And while you do that, putting win in the chat, I want to tell you a story about me and my business, because I spent 20 years doing this, right? I remember writing a response for DHS, and we wrote a response along with a whole bunch of other small businesses and companies that went, but when we wrote it, we went for the win, right? And we don't write RFIs to just be this generic exercise. We write it as if it's a proposal. And so we wrote this that way. And it was such a compelling response to an RFI that the CIO, who was the main program office for this, said it felt like we were already there under contract, and they invited us in to meet with us to talk about what we were recommending, because it had come with such a level of authority. The reason we had such a level of authority is because we were just good at one thing. We weren't good at a lot of things, but we were good at SharePoint in our case. If you're new to me, that's why I say SharePoint all the time. So you can beat out your competition by writing a really good response. So I want to move into how many responses and what's the framework I recommend. But let me just pause for a quick commercial break, because if you don't know this, the GovCon Chamber, we don't take money from the government or for anybody. And so one of the things I just want to put on your radar is that we're releasing a LinkedIn course. My content personally is viewed over 100,000 times a month. And imagine if you actually were putting out content in your customer's space that is viewed over 100,000 times a month or close to that. We want to teach you that, and that's what that course is for. So if you're interested in that, hearing more when it's launched, put LinkedIn in the chat and we'll let you know when it's available. Okay, let me drink water and commercial over. So how many responses should you write? I got just under 15 minutes. How many responses should you write? What I want you to understand before I give you the answer is that if you don't have metrics or data that gives you your own numbers, use my numbers. My numbers are good enough. As you start writing more responses and other stuff, you will begin to have your own set of data, and then you have your own numbers. For example, the answer, and I want to expand on this a minute, but I want to kind of give you the quick answer. RFIs, my answer is write as many as you can find that are in your core competency / tasks. Core competency, and I'll talk about task in a minute. So you want to write as many RFIs as you can in your department. Two things I tell people all the time is have a focused core competency. I do SharePoint. I do elevator work. I'm a painting company. Whatever it is, have a core competency. And then the second thing is have a focused agency. And so an example is HHS, or Department of Homeland Security, Veterans Affairs. That's a focused department. Don't go anywhere else. Go deep in there. And when you are, then you can write a lot of RFI responses, and you'll see the framework, how you can do this. I tell you how I do it, and I believe you can do the same thing. And you'll just get better with practice. But so core competency, if an opportunity comes out and it's SharePoint related, then I'm going to write to it, right? It's a slam dunk opportunity. I'm going to write to it. But I want to give you another thing to think about with RFIs. If an RFI comes out, and let's say it has 5 task areas, it's an IT contract, and one of the task areas has SharePoint. Or if you're in data, for example, it's got data science or AI, ML kind of thing. If one task area fits what I can do, or in your case, what you can do, I still write a full response. And I use up 90% of the pages to talk about how great I am at this one task area. In one page, or even a half a page, I say at the beginning, hey, I'm going to team up with another company to address the other task areas. We wanted to write and say that we can really nail this area. We can do this area good, and this is how we would approach it. Don't let anybody tell you an RFI has to be written a certain way. I don't care what it says. You can write it any way you want, and the government can read it or not. But when you write to your core competency, you are marketing right into that audience. And if you are good at that one task area and you write to that task area, they will be impressed, right? That's what I want to see. They might even ask you to come in and talk about that. They might, contracting officer might say, well, who are you looking at teaming up with? A large, a small? There might be some dialogue that happens. You can always find teammates for the other 4 task areas. But when you write to your core competency, it's one more chance to have that captive audience reading to your competency. So when I say as many as you can find, I'd be looking, my goal would always be to try to be writing 1 a week. You have to decide whether you can find 1 RFI in there a week. And that takes time, by the way. If you're newer at this, don't think you're going to do the numbers I say immediately. These are numbers that I would be happy with in my last company running at a steady pace. And so RFPs, how many RFP responses should you write? I believe you should write 4 a month. I believe you should write 4 RFPs a month. Not today, if you're not even near that stage. You'll get to that. And the way I would break it down is 1 opportunity that you're responding to as a prime contractor a month, and 3 that you're responding to as a sub. It's not that hard to respond to an RFP as a subcontractor on a team if they're actually doing their work as a prime, when you just have to provide a few pages in your core competency, or you have to provide your past performance, right? These things are not hard. And so having that kind of rhythm allows you to have a steady number out there. And I'll tell you why I use the number 4. And you can watch a whole nother training where I dig just into that one answer. But I say 4 RFP responses because if you write 4, the chances that you are 25% that you'll win 1 out of 4 responses you write. So every month you want to be winning 1 response. Remember, if you have your own data, use your own. But you should not really expect to win any less than 25%. If you're winning less than 25%, I would argue that you're probably writing to areas that are not your core competency. If you know what your core competency is, you will be able to go after it. I was talking to somebody yesterday, and they were in a couple of different areas, but when we nailed it all the way down, their data. And if all they do is write to data, at some point soon, they should expect to get to that 25% level and then start going up to 33%. And so that's why I say write 4 responses a month. In there, when you write it, most of the lift will be with the 3 opportunities that are being managed by other primes. This is why I tell you have strategic relationships, another training that you can find. It really is just a numbers game, right? If you haven't seen me say this before, there's a bell curve out there, and very quickly the bell curve says half the people will do what you want and half won't. The bell curve tells you half the responses you send out will get some traction and half won't. But the reality is you're not going to get to that half until you start sending out a sufficient amount of responses in your space. So if you only send out 10 responses in a year, how can you expect to really win a good amount? But if you send out 100, you guaranteed will win. If you're sending out 100 and a core competency that's yours, and you've got the experience to back that up, then there's no reason you shouldn't be expecting to win. I was talking with somebody, and I said you can just pay $1,000 to a freelancer who can help you write RFI responses. $1,000 per response. You can write 100 of these responses in a year. It'll cost you $100,000. If you win $1 million, just $1 million, that 10% profit margin will cover it. So positive RFI. But imagine if it's a $5 million win, right? And again, I'm not talking necessarily to those of you who aren't making money yet. If you're not making money yet, you've got to scale what I'm saying down to more reality. But if you're making $2, $3, $4, $5 million, then you should be able to expect to get to this stage. Writing responses is not a secret. It's just a process. So if you're following with what I'm saying about getting out there, the numbers game where you should be writing 4 a month at some point, that should be your goal, right? It doesn't mean today you switch over and tomorrow you're writing 4, but you should be aiming to get to a regular clip. And if you've got a couple of business developers in your company or proposal writers, they should be churning these out. This shouldn't be hard. And you just need to focus on the agency, focus on the core competency. So if you understand what I'm talking about on the number of responses to write, just put in numbers into the chat. Let me know you followed that, numbers. Okay, so the last thing I want to give you, a few minutes left, I want to give you a process for how I would write an RFI response. RFP, same thing. To me, and I use this loosely, but they're basically the same thing. You're trying to talk about your company, show some past performances, address the technical requirements, whatever that is, and weave in the customer specific information. RFI, RFP are basically the same things. RFPs are a compliance exercise as well. There's shall statements and stuff you have to deal with. But basically, both of them are the same thing. You're trying to persuade the customer to work with you. So here's my framework for writing a 10-page example. I used to be able to write 25-page response, no problem, in 2 days. And the reason is because I used reusable material, right? I stuck with SharePoint. I only wrote to my core competency. And at some point, I had really good reusable material. So if you have 10-page response, and let's use that as our example for an RFI. If you have a 10-page response, 2 pages go to about the company. It might be a title page. It might be something else. It might talk about how great you are, staffing, some other stuff. We have these certifications, but it's two pages are about the company and how great you are, and maybe a persuasion to go this acquisition approach or that one, right? 2 pages. 2 pages will be for past performances. Somewhere in there, you should be telling your story and give yourself at least 2 pages. If you're writing to an RFP, there is a little bit more structured framework, but it's kind of the same level, right? 20% is for about us. 20% is about the past performance. And then the third section is approach. So in here, I talk about just meeting the technical requirements. Here's my requirement. Here's our approach to what you have. So in here, I say 4 pages. 2 pages for the about company, 2 pages for the past performances, 4 pages for my approach, our core competency focus. Remember, again, elevators, SharePoint, data. If you know your core competency, you can do this all day long. And then the last 2 pages are customer specific, meaning this is where I'm communicating how I understand your particular mission, your challenges, your objectives, and I weave them in. And if you think about this, what I just described is an 80-20 rule. 80% is reusable stuff in our company, and 20% is customer specific that I weave in. When I talk about 2 pages for the customer and 4 pages for the approach, I probably will weave those 2 pages into the 4. Right. So in my approach, I'm mentioning the challenges that they have and how we'll address it, how specific objectives they're looking for. We can meet it this way. But basically, 20% of my response will be customer specific. 80% of it will be reusable. If you're new to this at the moment, it'll take you a little time to get to that reusable content. But if you do SharePoint migration, you can have easily the information you need, just checking my time, to be able to write it again and again and again, right? 1 page on SharePoint migration, 5 pages, 20 pages. One of the ways I could respond to migration RFIs was I would just take up an actual migration plan. I would put the customer that I'm trying to sell to's logo in there and some other stuff, and I would just throw it into the RFI as well, saying this is our migration plan. When I migrate SharePoint, I don't change my migration approach per customer. My migration approach takes into account how to evaluate the customer's unique situation, but that's woven into the approach, right? So I don't have to write a new approach for each customer. I tell them that I come in and triage your environment. I do a gap analysis, that kind of stuff. And so if you think about this, by the way, if you're following what I'm saying about this 80-20 rule, put 80-20 in the chat. So I know I got you and you're following it. But one of the last things I wanted to mention is that when you start writing reusable content, you can have a paragraph to start, and then you go to a page, right? A paragraph on, if I think about data, I'm working with the customers, going after FAA and data. Hi. And for them, I would say, write a paragraph that says, hey, we treat data as a strategic asset while also considering data as the center of gravity. And the way we do that is this, this, and this, or something. Paragraph about data. Then I would do a page about data. And the more RFIs I'm responding to, more RFPs I'm responding to, the more I'm really nailing that core competency and our approach to data and how we can help you manage data type thing. Well, think about having that. And now think about those 3 RFPs that are subcontracts. You don't go to a prime and say, hey, I'll be on there for cloud when you're a data company. Go to them and say, I'll be your reliable data company. And you can pick up these paragraphs and pages and put them into their responses as your contribution to that proposal, right? So a lot of stuff here. I know I'm wrapping up here very fast. I hope it made sense. Let me just say again, in this session, I told you how many RFI and RFP responses that I recommend you aim for at some point when you get to that maturity level, right? And how you can write those. If you take one thing away today, take away that being focused on one core competency will help you respond and win more. Okay, if you like today's training, please put thank you in the chat. Remember, government contracting, it's not secret, it's just a process. And part of the process is having a great weekend. I hope you have a great weekend, and I will see you in the next training, which is Monday.